Next question, Gary.
Dane, with the trees in Northern California, agriculture, trees in our yards, these trees are being harmed, tremendously harmed. I have a feeling that some of the agriculture people are going to the colleges, UC Davis, to start seeing what's wrong with their trees. A lot of what's happening is these particles are hitting the trees and they're weakening the trees, and then other diseases or other situations hit the trees, and that's where our trees are being tremendously harmed.
You're exactly right. My father was an arborist. I know a bit about trees. And it's a multitude of factors affecting the trees. And here's where we have the problem again. I was just in the field about 3 months ago with congressional reps and USDA scientists looking at a hillside of trees that has just flashed out stone dead. And looking at one of the USDA scientists whom I know, I asked if he saw any forest decline. And staring at a hillside of dead trees, he said no. And I walked away at that point. How do you call day night, black white, up down, with a straight face? How do you look yourself in the mirror? And that's what we're up against. They want to go to work at 8, come home at 5, and pretend nothing's wrong. And that's their job. Make no mistake about it. That's the job of so many of these federal agencies. And there's a lot of good people in these agencies. I don't want to deny that. But they are beaten down. I know a fish and game biologist I just met with 2 weeks ago again. Every time she opens her mouth, she says the hammer lowers on her immediately. And I would ask the rest of the people who are lowering the hammer, how long do you think you're going to survive when the trees are dying by the day? When we have an aquatic insect life decline in Shasta-Siskiyou County, as measured by Forest Service biologists, aquatic insect life decline of 90%, 90 in 10 years. That's a virtual crash. I just dove in the Pitt River. I've been diving my entire life. I've had my dive master certificate since I was 21 years old. I dove in all the deep current areas around the turbulence where the trout should be. Now, I know there's some trout there, but I couldn't find one. I couldn't find one. The water's very warm because the UV, the thermal energy, how many of you, even when the ambient temperature's not warm, you touch your car or something, it's hot as hell. The UV penetrates. It's a very penetrating radiation. It's killing plankton. Plankton are dying all over the globe. In fact, we have plankton stocks now down 50 to 60%. No plankton, no life on Earth. Would you think we'd hear about that on the news? Maybe between the American Idol commercials or something? Nothing. We get nothing. We are right now in uncharted territory. On the trees, as Gary just stated so accurately, yes, it's excessive, massive UV. The trees can't take it. It's bioavailable metals. The UV shuts down the tree's stomata, what they breathe through, what they respirate through. They can't respirate properly. These particulates are desiccants. It means they absorb all available moisture. How many of you remember the last time you saw dew in the morning? How about almost never? It's not there because they are siphoning off that moisture from the upper atmosphere, keeping it from evaporating in the first place. Now we have bioavailable metals, and we know they're bioavailable. We know it's in the rain. We're testing for it, and we know the effect. We have soil study on this. Causes organisms like trees to, when they sense that toxin of aluminum, they shut down nutrient uptake. They die slowly. Of course the beetles come in, and we have USDA and other people telling us it's just the beetles. It's just a cycle. This is no more a natural cycle than if it would be like, again, I've used a few examples, but one is if you walked up to somebody and shot them in the head and said, oh, it wasn't me, they died of a heart attack right before I shot them. Well, how can you make that argument? How can you call that natural? It's not natural. There's nothing natural about covering the sky with, let me give you a figure on this. Internationally recognized, he's the most internationally recognized geoengineer, David Keith. And I had a confrontation with him at a science conference in 2010. And I asked him point blank, had they done any study about the dumping of 20 million tons? This is their proposal for their target figure. 20 million tons of aluminum nanoparticulates in the atmosphere every year. Very cavalierly, he says this. And I asked him, had they done any study of human respiratory effects, environmental toxicity? And he tried to dodge the question by more or less, I'm paraphrasing, saying that, well, there's a lot of junk in the air anyway. Well, wait a minute, that junk's not aluminum. Have you studied aluminum? And he really immersed his leg down his mouth at that point. He said, no, we haven't done any study. Could terrible things happen tomorrow? We don't know. This is the kind of attitude they have. So anyway, that's part of what's killing the trees. Sorry for that long answer. Another question?
Thank you. I have actually two questions. One is we're beekeepers, and every year we have to replace an enormous amount of bees and that we're losing. So I'm wondering if they've done studies and correlated the metals in the air to the reduction of bees and colony collapse. And secondly, is there anywhere you can move that has a reduced level of all these metals that we can get away from?
Two good questions. Is CCD, colony collapse disorder, related to geoengineering? Absolutely, positively, yes. And this is not hard to figure out. When they're trying to pin colony collapse disorder on a chemical, and I'm not saying the chemicals are good at all. I'm not saying it's not a factor. It is. And that's important to remember in all these equations. It's not a this or a that. It's a this and that and a whole bunch of other things. But if it was just the chemicals, why are the bees just as dead 1,000 miles into the wilderness? Why is that? There's obviously a bigger factor. So and there's a number of factors with that bigger factor. Yes, we have a completely altered light wavelength form, for one. As you fill the atmosphere with these particulates, it alters the light wavelength form. That affects photosynthesis, that affects growth, flowers, pollens. Two, you have fungal issues. Colony collapse disorder is related to fungal issues. As you saturate the atmosphere with particulates, you kill beneficial microbes from the clouds to the ground. When you kill those microbes, what happens? Fungus takes off. What happens in the human body? When you take an antibiotic, what happens? Fungal growth. You kill the beneficial microorganisms. So now you have fungal issues entering the equation. Now you have RF frequency. As they saturate the atmosphere with these particulates, they're also bombarding the atmosphere with massively powerful RF frequency transmitters, as I laid out. That has a huge effect on the bees as well. It's everything. And on that species extinction rate I mentioned of 200 plus species of plant and animal going extinct every single day, 70 to 80% of that is fungally related. 70 to 80%. Fungal encroachment is very slow and insidious. So as you tilt the whole system off scale, it starts to spiral out of control faster and faster. And I've tried to reach one of the head bee people in the whole country. You can't fill a cup that's already full. A lot of people in academia think they know everything because their peer-reviewed, establishment-ordained manual says so. This is why I published an article called "The PhDs Are Ruining the World," because they're trained to look at science as what their textbook says it is, not to think out of the box, not to question anything. So you can't tell many of these people much. There are exceptions, but many times, if it's not in their textbook, it's not a reality. So this is something we have to hurdle. We have to face the obvious here. And yes, absolutely related. Absolutely the biggest cause, in my opinion, of colony collapse disorder, because everything affects it. The bioavailable metals, the fungal issues, the UV, which is hugely harmful to the bees, hugely harmful, kills terrestrial insects. By the way, also terrestrial insect decline, not just aquatic insect, but terrestrial land insect decline in Shasta-Siskiyou County by Forest Service measurements, 90% decline. How many bugs you see around your lights at night anymore? Not a lot. There's some exceptions in certain areas where conditions are different, but the bug count is down horrifically, so definitely connected. Next question.
Thank you for your presentation. I'm a pool and spa guy. I test water in pools all the time. Over the last 30 years, I have seen a change in the way water is from one week to the next. Is there a test kit that I can use that will show me what's in the water that didn't used to be?
One thing we do that's easy to find out what is in the rain. The pH of the rain should be, if it's not contaminated with these metals, about 5, 6. Now on a pH scale, one full point in that scale is a magnitude of 10, just like a Richter scale. So if your pH goes from 5.6 to 6.6, you just went up 10 times. So you can test your rain with even litmus paper, which is not expensive. If you have rain that's 6.6, 6.8, I promise you it's got aluminum in it. We've tested again and again and again. It's the only thing that can drive it up that fast. So that's an easy way to tell if there's metal in there. As far as determining the actual metal counts, we like to use Basic Lab, and Basic has given us good tests so far. But here's what else we've seen. This is the way they hide what's in the water. California State Water Quality quit testing for aluminum in 2002. Why is that? Fish and Game stopped testing for aluminum in their runoff. Why is that? They test for 130 elements, but suddenly they don't test for aluminum. It was acknowledged about 2 months ago that Fish and Game did acknowledge there was aluminum running down their waterways. I spoke to the California State Water Quality representative who's doing the, quote, investigation on this. But she made it clear to me that they're not going to test the rain, period. Didn't even want to talk about it. Where does she think runoff comes from? I mean, this is astounding that there's just a willful effort to not find the problem, period. Also, and this is important, when people test at labs, we've seen labs in the last 2 years do this, they have radically raised their MDL, their minimum detection levels. So, what's that mean? It means that the detection level is so high that you have to find a boulder in your rain before they'll detect it. How much does that help? And this is another way to hide the problem. Just like when Fukushima went off, what did we see? Suddenly the safe level of radiation went up 10,000%. Just change the science if you're trying to hide something. Just change reality, and that's what they do. So yes, we've seen the whole aquatic environment change radically in the last 10 years especially. It's been changing slowly for as long as you stated, but the last 10 years has been particularly horrific. Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Dane, for your presentation. With the artificial warming of the Arctic, I'm concerned about the methane release of the hydrates in the ocean floor. Can you touch briefly
Thank
on
you,
that?
Jonathan, for bringing that up. It's very important. You know, there's so many aspects of this. Whenever I do a presentation, I don't always hit every point, but that's an extremely important point, and it's usually in my presentations. In fact, I talk about methane a lot because methane has, short of nuclear catastrophe, the greatest potential and likelihood to end all life on Earth. So, here's what's happened. As the power structure has completely altered the climate for the last 60 years at an ever-increasing level, they've done an increasing amount of damage. Now they're doing even more to try to hide that damage, which makes it even worse still. They've altered upper-level wind currents. That's altered ocean currents. Now we have warm water pumping into the Arctic. That's thawing methane on the seafloor, methane hydrate. Many of you have seen the Bermuda Triangle stories, ship sinkings. This is methane release. It's not aliens, at least scientifically, not in the aliens, or not in the Earth circumstances we study. The methane releases, aerates the water like a bottle of champagne. Ships have no buoyancy. They go to the bottom. So now we have huge methane fields releasing. I'm not putting everything on geoengineering. Again, we all have to look at the whole picture, not a this or a that, but a this, that, and the other. So when we put 100 million tons of carbon in the atmosphere a day, that's a problem. I can't deny that. That's a big problem. Methane is a bigger problem, and geoengineering a bigger problem yet, because that's helping to release the methane. So right now, as we speak, methane is covering the planet. It's covering the continental United States. Methane, over a several-month period, can be 1,000 times more potent a greenhouse gas than CO2. 1,000 times. And this is what the climatologists don't talk about. And how can you have the biggest scientific panel ever assembled in human history on any subject not put methane in their equation? How can you have such incredible omission? So right now, in the Arctic alone, there's enough methane to cause a Permian-style mass extinction. That's about a 95% global extinction, 100 times over. That's how much methane is there. And it's releasing now. Now, it's certainly a long way from any release of a large percentage, or we would already be gone. But if 1/2 of 1% of that methane releases, that's about a 400% or 500% increase in the total greenhouse gas right now. And geoengineering has helped this to happen. It is not diminishing it. So the methane, again, it's a very, very lethal and dire problem. How many of you saw the fish die-offs? You've seen the fish die-offs with fish floating up all over the globe? A lot of media didn't cover it. It's happening all over the globe, and nobody seems to know why. They know exactly why it's happening. Because methane and hydrogen sulfide is gassing from the seabed because it's warming. Again, as that water warms, more UV, ocean currents changing, warm water ending up where it shouldn't be, methane starts to release, goes into the atmosphere, even more warming. It's called the feedback loop. It feeds on itself once it gets going. So as that methane releases, it deoxygenates the water. It causes either a hypoxic zone, which is very low oxygen, or an anoxic zone, no oxygen. Everything floats up dead immediately. It's happening around the globe right now. So we have global pelagic fish populations, the food fish, tuna, so forth, 95% depleted right now, 95%. So again, we're talking about Earth life support systems, the air we breathe, the water we drink, and the methane. You'll hear more about it, and I encourage anybody to Google global methane emergency. And here's where you got to be careful. You got to sift the baby from the bathwater. Because groups like the AMIG group, the Arctic Methane Emergency Group of scientists, I know one of them, and some communication with another, their data on what's happening with the methane is accurate. It is accurate. It matches all the satellite imagery. But where they run awry is they are calling for geoengineering. These groups are calling for it as if it hasn't been happening for 60 years. How big can the bubble be for some of these people? It's astounding. Is that what they have to say to keep their jobs? So all of us need to learn to sift the baby from the bathwater, to take what's accurate, throw out what's not. We all need to learn to do this. Next question. Thank you for bringing that up, John.
Thank you. My question is, I've been noticing on my swimming pool that I have the white solution every time they spray, which is pretty daily, that I have the white solution laying on the top of my pool. Now, am I a fool for even using the swimming pool? Because as the gentleman asked, where would I move to if they're doing this all over the world?
I didn't quite get to that question. Thank you for bringing that up again. I'll answer both those questions. One, I'll back up because it was asked from this woman, can you move? Nowhere. There's nowhere to get away from this. In 2010, a study was done from 1,000 whales from around the globe, the most remote places on the planet, and the report actually used this terminology. They said the whales had jaw-dropping levels of aluminum in their tissues. There was nowhere to escape from this. So although we see some areas that seem to get hit harder than others, this is a global phenomenon. There's no escaping it. On what you see on the surface of your water, when we first really started to see this phenomenon, it's almost like a glittery crust if the wind pushes it to one side. And I remember the first time I really saw this, I thought, there can't be that much metal there. And I took samples, took it to the lab, and the figures were absolutely staggering. It was exactly what it appeared to be. And my pond doesn't touch soil. It's got $20,000 worth of pond liner, 2 layers thick, to make sure we have no contact with soil. It's coming from the air, period. So there is that much metal. And think about how much metal it takes to change soil pH 10 to 12 times toward alkaline. And we know we have pH changes that significant in Shasta County. It takes a lot of metal to do that. So that it is metal you're seeing, and there is nowhere to hide. I can answer those two easily. Another question, Sally.
Yeah, Dane, part of the geoengineering is a large piece of the Agenda 21 puzzle, particularly causing drought and fire. Could you address that a little bit?
Yes, it can't not be. Here again, the fires, as Sally correctly brought up, as they do what they're doing, the forests are burning obviously because they're dying. So instead of the forests absorbing carbon, becoming a carbon sink, which they're supposed to do, and emitting oxygen, the forests are dying. So now they're a carbon source instead of a carbon sink. Siberia started to burn in April of this year. Siberia is normally frozen until mid-June. There were fire fronts 200 miles wide in Siberia. Siberia lost 100 million acres of forest a year and a half ago. We don't have any more recent figures than that. In 1 year, 100 million acres. Try to imagine how much land that is. So geoengineering is really a direct causal factor for the forest die-off because of the intense UV, the drought situation, and the toxic soils, everything we've been over. So again, that's yet one more factor which geoengineering is sucking the noose around our neck. In regard to Agenda 21, in the case of California, I wish I could make the argument that California was just a climate sacrifice zone, which means for whatever they're trying to do for the common good, we just get thrown under the bus. But that's not the case. There's more to it. I've studied this issue too long in California because they diminish our rain every single time. Even when monsoonal flows come up from the southwest, we can see the aircraft over the top of the individual thunderheads. Many of you who've been around thunderheads, the convective clouds, your whole life, they used to rise up very clearly in the sky, bright and defined. Now what you'll see is as they start to convect, pretty soon they just blow out into what looks like a giant forest fire smoke bank because they're aerosolizing those clouds. They're not letting those clouds convect and drop rain. And when we see such a consistency with fronts coming right at us that they are blown apart, you used to look out in the Pacific meteorologically at the maps and you'd see low pressure after low pressure after low pressure lined up coming in. We'd have rain for a month here in Redding, right? We see them on the radar blowing these systems apart. completely blowing them apart again and again and again. You can't not reach the point where you realize there's intent here, and as Sally just brought up, then you see water rights being chased, control being exercised because the water's cut off. There's a lot more playing out here. These programs are not for the common good in any way, shape, or form. I think it's impossible to separate this from Agenda 21. They're joined at the hip. So this is what amounts to weather warfare against the American population. And weather warfare is very real, by the way. It's being exercised against countries around the globe. 2010, Pakistan showed resistance to U.S. policy and got slaughtered with flooding. 20% of their country underwater almost immediately. And other examples I've given in the past, Thailand, same thing, refused the U.S. an air base for weather modification. They got slaughtered, record flooding. We see some other very interesting phenomena. A lot of you probably saw Cyclone Haiyan that hit the Philippines last year, intensified incredibly anomalously right before it hit, cut a swath through the Philippines, wiped them out. The U.S. showed up under humanitarian pretext, and now they're building bases there. We see Hurricane Sandy. I'm sure all of you remember Hurricane Sandy. How could they know that that hurricane would take a completely unprecedented 90-degree westerly turn a week out? How could they know that? They could not possibly meteorologically know that such an unprecedented event would happen. Why would they hit the U.S. coast? Why would they hit their own population? Because one, we have to realize those running the show here, it all goes back to the central banks. People always ask, where's the money coming from? It's coming from the central banks that's propping up the stock market, that's artificially greasing the wheels all over. That's why we can't get any word out. Because the funding all comes from the same place. Where does California's $40, $50 billion yearly deficit go? Where does that go every year? Nobody seems to even ask that question. It all goes back to the central banks. So what I'm getting at is our government is not there for us. Those who really pull the strings, I think we're all pretty clear our government's not really there for us, right? It's not about the American people. So was that demonstration, was Hurricane Sandy, was that a demonstration of their power? Were there perhaps some political elected officials that maybe were thinking this wasn't really a good thing, geoengineering? And was that a shot across their bow? I don't know. But I can tell you, meteorologically speaking, that storm was engineered. And anybody who says otherwise, you'll have meteorologists, even our local meteorologist, Mr. Mike Kruger, who said, he told an activist that anybody who thinks this is going on probably believes in a flat earth. Now, how does a guy like that in a position like that, when you have mountains of study, when you have congressional documents, UN documents, 150 patents, you have statements by the U.S. military, the desire to own the weather. We have so much data, I don't even know where to start. And yet he won't debate the issue. He won't talk about facts. Reading Radio tried to get him or 6 other meteorologists to debate me, fact for fact. Nobody accepted. They won't debate fact for fact because they have nothing to stand on. They're simply making a decision that they feel is protecting their employment, and it's not okay. It's not okay for someone like Mike Kruger to try to marginalize an issue that's poisoning my children or your children. It's not okay. And these people need to be held accountable. They need to be questioned and put in the spotlight and asked to defend their position. If they're using their official position to marginalize an issue of such gravity, that's not okay. If air quality is using their position to marginalize an issue of this gravity and thus forcing us to breathe this stuff in every day and we all pretend it's not happening, that's not okay either. If all of us stand together, united, and say we're not going to take no for an answer for investigating this, acknowledging this issue. It's not a matter of investigation. The facts are there. We have the test. It needs to be acknowledged. And we know that the Air Quality Board or Shasta County Board of Supervisors can't stop this. We know that. I made that clear to Pam Giacomini, and she was very cordial to me and very nice, and I have to give her the credit due for that. She helped get this put on the board. But I made it clear to her also that we're not asking for them to try to stop this. We absolutely know they couldn't possibly begin to do that, but they do have a job to disclose it. I think we all agree on that. If we're being exposed to this and they know it and their air quality is helping to hide this, that's not okay. So I'm sorry that's a long answer, but you can understand my passion when I have to watch my kids cough and hack from this, and I know what they're breathing, I know what it's doing to any chance for their future. It's hard not to feel passionate about this. Forgive me. Next question. I don't know which side we're on here.
Hi. Okay, our agronomist findings on our wheat crops, they've been chemically burned and we can't figure out why, and we're finding these aluminums or these heavy metals in our crops. Can we take our findings to the insurance companies and maybe the insurance companies sue whoever's responsible for it and make that, would that bring it to light?
This is a great question, and that's the kind of that's the kind of thinking that will help get something done here. Insurance companies are being slaughtered from this. You said you saw your plants chemically burned, right? Now, did this happen?
Entire wheat crops.
Okay, here's what we've seen. This is another huge factor that I haven't touched on yet. Artificial ice nucleation for weather modification. We have patents on this, including from NASA. This is where the equation gets very interesting. They are chemically nucleating rainstorms into snowstorms. Now, many might not believe this, but it's absolute fact. Why does it snow now at 50 degrees? I copy the weather maps, snow at 50 degrees, and this is chemically burning the plants. This is what I'm getting at. When you cause an endothermic reaction, we have the patents for this. I've done articles on this with lab demonstrations in the article, 2-minute long YouTubes, demonstrating how powerful these ice nucleating agents are. And in this demonstration, a couple drops of biological ice nucleating agent can freeze a vessel of water instantly. You can tip it upside down in 1 second, literally. Barium, hydroxide, and ammonium, also ice nucleators. It causes, again, an endothermic reaction. Endothermic reactions burn things. It chemically burn things. So we saw in the case of the Chinese government, they openly announced that they were creating snowstorms over Beijing. Look it up. Look up Chinese scientists create artificial snowstorms. Their Bureau of Weather Modification admitted to it until they did $1 billion worth of damage to Beijing, because this snow is very different than naturally nucleated snow. It's heavy. It's like concrete because you have warmer temperatures. Warmer temperatures carry more moisture. And this snow sticks like glue. And I've been in the forest. December 21st, 2012, major ice nucleated storm. I live in the wilderness. I remember that night because I was in an absolute state of angst. I love the forest. No forest, no people. So all I could hear, and I live in the middle of nowhere in the wilderness area, off the grid, and all I could hear, and I remember the fury I felt, were jet aircraft passing over one after another and trees collapsing in the forest. All you could hear was trees crashing to the ground from 15 inches of snow. It shouldn't have done a thing to these trees. And 300-400-year oaks tipped over everywhere. And so what did we see last winter? A lot of you might have heard of the snow that didn't melt right, or that actually seemed to burn or smell. I don't know if you Google fake snow, you'll see a lot of people notice this. Farmers, people who don't know anything about geoengineering, notice there's something really wrong with the snow. Why? Because when you chemically nucleate snow, you create a substance that sublimates. It's called sublimation. So you all know what dry ice is. Converts from a solid to a gas without ever becoming a liquid. And that characteristic starts to happen with artificially nucleated snow. And we've tested the snow here, and it's full of the same elements that we know are in geoengineering patents. So what did we see with the snowstorms? We had snowstorms last year, one after another, and the Weather Channel theatrically names them because they want this to seem like a very big winter event. They talked about the ferocious winter, blah, blah, blah. Well, how do you have winter storms one after another with moisture right off the Gulf of Mexico? Since when do you have winter storms coming off the Gulf of Mexico? And here's what you saw every single time. Same jet stream pattern, pumping the air up through Alaska, cooling it down, back to the Gulf, picking up moisture, and you saw an ice storm. Ice storms used to be a rarity. Now it's the norm. So you have warm water coming in, 45, 48 degrees. They ice nucleate the hell out of it. You have a big band of frozen precipitation or ice storm before it becomes the cold side of the storm. So now every storm, according to Weather Channel, we have a warm side to the storm and a cold side to the storm. Well, since when? Since when? And these ice storms do horrific damage, and that's another form of weather warfare. Slovenia was slaughtered when they refused to sign on to an EU slavery agreement. A 6-inch ice storm, 6-inch ice storm, it's never happened before, wiped out their country, ice nucleated material. A bigger example. How many of you remember the 100,000 cattle that died in South Dakota last year? Anybody remember that? I did a full article on that called Engineered Snowstorms Begin Again. Does logic kick in? How could you have 100,000 cattle die from a winter snowstorm on the 6th of October? At the same time, you had 85 degrees and rain in Chicago. 89 degrees in rain in Kansas City. I have the maps. I captured them because I knew they were going to go away quick. I still have these maps. And you're snowing at 40 degrees. How can that kill 100,000 cattle? Because one, the snow is heavy, as I told you, and two, and this is more important, back to the chemically burnt crops. That same chemical reaction is lethal on the hide of those animals. When they're encased in material they can't move in, and they have an endothermic chemically reacting material against their hide, it kills them. So here you saw a few days later, you say you had cattle everywhere laying in the mud, dead, from a snowstorm in early October. Cattle that are used to temperatures much, much colder. We see chemical burnt plants here. We see them all over Redding. Plants that are hardy to 20 degrees colder than anything we had last winter, they're chemically burnt. If they got enough moisture on them, they're chemically burnt, and that's exactly what we'd expect from an endothermic reacting material. It's part of the weather mod. If you Google engineered snowstorms, any of you, you'll find plenty about that. That's how they chemically burn. Grab them.
Dane, I've been watching Yellowstone, where they've been having a lot of really unusual readings, and the ground's raising. Could that be the methane maybe causing a super volcano?
Methane doesn't cause in-ground heating per se, but everything is connected to everything else. Here's what you have. You have something called thermal expansion. Thermal expansion can raise ocean levels by itself. So as you have a planet that's heating up, you have a lot of thermal expansion happening. That starts to cause tectonic issues, which starts to generate heat. It's a whole chain of events. So indirectly, yes, there is a connection. Everything's connected in this equation. And we do have Yellowstone. Actually, they've shut down some roads in the last couple of weeks in Yellowstone. I don't know how many of you know that, because the roads are melting. They're literally melting. Yellowstone is a location where a supervolcano has occurred in the past. And this is where the equation gets even a little more diabolical, is we know, and this sounds sci-fi, but I only ask people to investigate. We know that these enormously powerful radio frequency transmitters can affect tectonically sensitive areas. So as they bounce 3 billion watts onto the atmosphere, and with these particulates they're spraying, they can then bounce that signal right back down into the planet. And when they do that, and you pump this power straight into the planet, and they can do geological readings and so forth with very low-powered instruments, even power in the several hundred watt range. Now we're talking about 1 billion watts. This can have huge effects to the Earth's strata, very, very negative and in many ways unknown effects. So with all the experimentation they're doing, we can only guess at the cause and effect, truly. I mean, we can't really know. Now, one other thing I didn't mention with the methane that's flooding the atmosphere, this is going on right now, Project Lucy and Project Alamo. These are acronyms. And they're using those same ionosphere heaters to now try to undo what they've already done, making the equation ever more insane at every level. So they are literally, right now, blasting the atmosphere with opposing frequencies to try to degrade some of the methane. And they have no idea what that will do. And this is going on right now. You can Google Project Lucy. So nobody asks us. It's just like the nuclear weapons. Did anybody ask? They went to the South Seas and just took islands, set up huge experiments. Anybody who's ever seen the movie Trinity about the nuclear detonations, it's so sobering. 185 fully functional warships. They're like kids, again, kids in a sandbox. Let's set them all up and let's blow it up and see what happens. And that's the same mentality you have right now, literally. So they're taking it from one level of insanity to another, and right now we have Project Lucy and Project Alamo going on, where they're blasting the atmosphere with these radio frequencies, trying to degrade the methane that's filling the atmosphere right now. And to give you an idea on the methane, atmospheric methane has not been over 700 parts per billion for the last 1,000,000 years. 1,000,000 years, no higher than that. There's some readings on parts of the planet, the methane has gone up nearly 1,000 parts per billion in a year. That's the gravity of what's happening. That's how fast it's happening. There's some methane readings now up to 2,550, 2,600 parts per billion. It's spewing. In fact, the last reports from the LAPTFC in the Arctic, there's a research vessel there now. We don't know if we'll hear anything from them because they may not let that data out. But the last report we got, where they were seeing plumes of methane from the sea floor 1 kilometer wide, and they were seeing thousands of those plumes. The ocean's virtually boiling, and they are not releasing this information. So bottom line is, we simply must bring this to light. We must get this issue to light. And I got a call, by the way, a week ago, a little less than a week, it was last Thursday, from someone on the inside of these programs who trusted a congressional candidate who I know. That candidate convinced him to call me. I recognize this individual's name from documents I've seen. He's an architect in these programs, in a bubble. Had no idea the kind of cataclysm that was happening on the ground. And this man, to his credit, he wants to remain anonymous, but to his credit, he listened. And he's looking at data we're passing on right now. But it's that sort of mentality that you have where they don't look at the consequences of what they're doing, just like the nuclear detonations. And so many people want to deny this issue because they simply say, like Jesse Ventura just did, by the way. I don't know how many of you saw what Jesse Ventura put out, but he's obviously got a new agenda now. Maybe he wants to run for office because he tried to deny this issue on the simple premise that, well, they would never do this to themselves. Well, one, what kind of a basis is that for a conclusion? And two, we're talking about the same power structure that has built enough nuclear weaponry to mathematically destroy life on Earth 12,000 times over. Well, they did that to themselves. I don't know how we're going to get out of that one. And also, on the nuclear issue, we have 3 reactors in total meltdown in Japan right now. China syndrome. Many of you know what that term means. They're through the containment vessel melting into the surface of the Earth right now. Nuclear volcanoes. And what does Obama do? He just authorized $6.5 billion to build some more in Georgia. So this is the sort of mentality you have. So anybody who thinks they wouldn't do this themselves, they're wrong. Also, we know, and I did this in my last presentation, they're building DUMBs, and that acronym certainly applies. It's Deep Underground Military Bases. We know this. If you've never seen the picture of the moles, mole is a giant tunnel boring machine. My last presentation, if you go to geoengineeringwatch.org, it's the top one on the list. And if you look at these machines, you can't believe they're real. Some are 50 feet high, giant tunnel boring machines, and we know they're boring these underground facilities. They're digging in as if they're going to ride this out somehow. Screw everything up on the surface and ride it out underground. It's not going to happen. They're stocking these bunkers up. We know that because we spoke to Mountain House Solar or Mountain House Foods. Many of you heard of them. They're freeze-dried. They were actually off retail for a while supplying the government because they're stocking up these bunkers. But here's the rub. A parallel event to what we're facing now, methane mass extinction, if we continue on this track, so we must change tracks in order to not end up there, but if we continue on this track, we have a parallel era, the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, a methane mass extinction that happened 55 million years ago. The equilibrium after that period was about 10 to 20 million years, and you can't ride that out underground. So, and in fact, where we're heading right now is even worse than that because these methane reservoirs are bigger than what released then. And we're on track for something called Venus syndrome. And that's a scientific scenario, and we are on that track right now. So again, the gravity of this situation, that's why I stress again and again, this was not an issue that I liked or wanted or felt comfortable with in any way, shape, or form. I gave my entire life to this issue because this is the hole in the bottom of the ship. This is the house burning down. And right now, anything else we do, if we're not focused on this issue, it's equivalent to trimming the hedge or mowing the lawn while the house burns to the ground. That doesn't make any sense. We have to focus on this issue. We have to plug the bottom of the ship, period, or nothing else will matter. Another question.
Yeah, quick comment. I spent a few years over in Iraq when it was 120 degrees. Came home and...
I salute your service, first of all. I salute that.
December 2010, came home, and it was like a spring day, and of course, 70, 80 degrees, and the sun is burning my skin. And I'd be outside all day working in 120, 130 degree temperatures without a problem. So, yeah, big difference that I noticed.
So you felt higher UV levels here than you did?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, no question about it.
And that may be. I have no way of metering there. So
Well,
ozone holes tend, I believe you, ozone holes tend to move around in very peculiar ways. So, I mean, what you're describing could very well be.
So I'm wondering, a question I have about the reflection, the property of the reflecting. Does it work 2 ways, where the sun is coming through the chemtrail itself and magnifying the intensity of the sun hitting our skin.
Yes, you bring up a very important point. As I said earlier, we believe we know they can cool, we know they can heat. We know this. The only time we see them spraying at night is when we're about to have very, very record or close to record temperatures. They're trapping that heat. So, one, obviously, if you have a reflective material that reflects thermal energy, it can reflect it up or down, correct? So it traps thermal energy. And two, the magnification effect. That's a very, very important question because we are seeing, when we get these high pressure domes over us that fry the hell out of us, we're seeing even higher UV levels when there's a layer of this silvery white haze above us. The UV goes up, not down, but up. And there are materials that we know can cause this sort of a lens effect, and it appears they are using that. Why? We can speculate, but one reason may be to increase the strength of the high pressure dome, to increase the clockwise rotation of the high pressure, to steer the jet stream. Certainly we know they don't care what's happening on the ground, so we do see that effect. We do see a lens effect at time where they actually appear to be creating heating. So, and also we have, even though you're burning, you may be low in vitamin D. This is another effect that's causing adding to the disease. Latest statistics show that 98% of the population is vitamin D deficient, even people who spend a tremendous amount of this time in the sun. Two possible reasons for that. One, these are light refracting materials, so it has to affect photosynthesis, even though there's no direct study on this, because they don't want study on this. As you change the light wavelength form, it has to affect photosynthesis, and it quite likely affects our body's ability, because we're talking about a different light wavelength form, to create vitamin D. And also, if the UV is too intense, it's likely that the body even shuts down vitamin D production, perhaps, to try to defend against that intense UV. We don't know. We don't know because there's no study on this, but we certainly know that the vitamin D is down. Things aren't growing. I mean, a lot of you have probably experienced that with your own gardens. So anyway, he brings up a good point. It appears they can actually create a lens effect and heat under certain circumstances. Yes, sir. Oh, you have one more? Yeah, I'm sorry.
Real quick, and then about the weather meteorologist information that gets put out, maybe can you talk about the fact that they've changed the imagery and the weather reports to where they used to show us the satellite imagery of the actual clouds, but now it's all digitally enhanced. So
that's another great point. By the way, I have a question for you. How many of your former comrades know what's going on in the sky?
Every one of them.
Thank you.
I've got my buddy in Montana, the guys I've served with from 2003. They're not pulling the wool over our eyes. So
if you want materials to send to them, I'll supply you whatever you need on me. Flyers, DVDs, anything you need.
Are you going to do
that? Thank you. That's what we need, because that's who we need on our side. We need our military brothers and sisters, honorable men and women, and I so salute their service. I've given to DAV for 20 years, VFW. I so salute their service. And they're being used in a way that's simply inexcusable for those in power to use these honorable men and women in this way. So that's the best news I've had tonight. Thank you. In this situation, I mean, I've tried hard to focus on reaching our military brothers and sisters. To answer your question, which is a great question, that's why Raytheon and Lockheed Martin control the weather modeling. That's why Rothschilds owns the Weather Channel. The Rothschilds. Think about that. They have to control the message. They have to tell you that. I saw them spend 10 minutes trying to explain why it's snowing at 50 degrees. Why winter storms now have a warm and a cold side. And to see these guys lie, I don't care what paycheck they get. How does a man stand up there and lie? I don't understand that at all. I really don't. And the kind of spineless people that are involved in helping to hide this crime, they need to be considered accessories to the crime. So we see exactly what he described, the altering of weather maps, and once in a while you'll see a huge RF frequency donut appear on a meteorological map. And I've seen Weather Channel meteorologists pretend it's not there. It's as obvious as hell a giant donut appears from a radio frequency signal, and they pretend it's not there. So we've seen Weather Channel change their maps because the areas they were spraying were very visible until about a year ago. And now they've changed those maps so they can screen out whatever they want. And we have film footage of a weatherman stating that, telling us on the air live that what we were seeing was not rain, it was materials the military was putting in the air. And he explained even on the air that we can filter all that out if we want to. Well, that's nice. I mean, where does the truth come into this picture? So what you're saying is exactly right. They're controlling the message, they're controlling the meteorological maps, and now on the UV issue, by the way, that I just mentioned, that now we have some disclosure from NASA a week ago that's shocking a lot of people. What happened immediately? Suddenly there's a big push by global powers centering in the EU to form a worldwide UV data processing center. That's nothing but a filter to hide the truth. That's all that is. We want to control the data. We'll tell you what the UV is. That's how they hide everything. So anyway, that's a great point. So know that the data you're looking at from official sources is nothing more than fictitious sources. And I've been in high-level EPA meetings in Sacramento. In fact, 5 top, Deborah Whitman's here, who really helped arrange that meeting. She was with me at that meeting. And we were basically told to our face the system is rigged. That they test for combustion particulates only, the rest of the sample goes out the window. There again, what's that agency doing? Just like the weather people? They're there to hide the truth, period. Keep that in mind. Thank you for those questions. Thank you for your service. And please don't leave without me getting an address or something. I can supply you with materials. Thank you. Yes, sir.
So I applaud you in coming here and shedding light to this on all of us. And so we get on the right track and we get all of this stopped. What is our turnaround for getting the planet back to what it was before all this crap started?
That's a question I don't like to answer, but it's an important question. One, as far as getting it to the point where we can stop it, the only way it's going to stop is when the population is absolutely unwilling to have this issue hidden any longer. And once we expose it, and once our military brothers and sisters realize what they're a part of, once families, I know this congressional candidate who had this person on the inside call me, he has a brother in the Air Force who's high up in the Air Force and who he believes is involved with these programs. And there's civil war into their house because the family won't accept that he's a part of this. Once this is widely known, I don't think those in power will be able to get enough participation. I know that our military is filled with honorable men and women. And if they realize what's going on, I believe they won't participate. And I believe that's the point in time these programs come to a screeching halt. I'm banking on that. Next, if we stop them, what happens? The geoengineers and the global power structure will try to tell you, it's called double collapse scenario. Once you start, you cannot stop. That's what they tell you. It's like telling a heroin addict, once you start, you can't stop because withdrawal is just too tough. You just got to keep going. That's not true. In fact, if we don't stop, we're done. It's that simple, we're done. What will happen when we stop? There will be absolutely unimaginable weather on the planet because they are suppressing a lot of weather at the cost of making the overall situation worse, at the cost of building up the pressure overall. They're suppressing cyclones. Other than Hurricane Sandy, everybody remembers the 2005-2006 season where the U.S. got slaughtered. 2006, even according to the Discovery Channel, the U.S. reinstituted its hurricane suppression program, and we can see them on radar knocking these hurricanes out. We have patents. One patent called a substance called Dynamat. It literally takes the convection down completely. We know they're using this material. We can see them blowing these cyclones apart. If the cyclone's heading for Cuba or Haiti, they let it go. But if it's heading for the U.S. mainland, they'll spray it down. Even Hurricane Sandy, even though that appeared to have been steered, and we have even the HARP signals to prove that, by the way. There's technology that can show where these RF frequencies are strongest, and we saw the HARP signature all over that hurricane. But we also saw the aerosolized Hurricane Sandy. We can see it on the radar because Hurricane Sandy had a low pressure center of 940 millibars, very powerful storm, 1,000-mile circulation. It should have been a Cat 3 or Cat 4. So that was a measured blow. So they can suppress the planet's attempts to try to cool itself, and that's what they're doing. We had less tornadoes this year. I don't know how many of you know that. It started out to be a record low year for tornadoes because when you put this white canopy, how many of you seen when the storms come through? If there's a break in the clouds, you don't see the sun shining through. You just see more white. You don't see the sun shining through anymore. You don't because there's a canopy of white over the top. Same thing with the tornado development. That stops convection. That reduces the tornado count overall, but at what cost? The planet can't cool itself. So the bottom line is, if we don't allow the planet to start releasing that heat, it's all building up, and it's going to be that much worse of a backlash. Will the planet return to what we've known if they stopped? No. Too much damage has been done to return to the planet we have known. Could the planet still support life? Yes. It did. The planet's been through so much. I don't think, all of us here would certainly revere the miraculous planet that we live on. It was created to a degree that it's hard to even comprehend the life support systems of planet Earth. How do you comprehend that? And the planet has always sustained life through whatever has happened until man tried to play God with the planet. So based on the data we have, no, the planet will not return to what we've known in any time frame that matters to us. But it could definitely support life. And in fact, the data we have for the western US, let's look at a previous era, Pliocene epoch, 5.2 million years ago, the carbon count was 25% higher than today. And was the western US a droughted out dust bowl? No, it was lush because they weren't blocking the rainfall. It rained a lot, carbon-laden rain, and what did that do to the forest? It stimulated the forest. That's how the planet responds. When it begins to heat, you have more rain. For every degree of warming Fahrenheit, you have 7% more moisture in the atmosphere. That's a lot. It should be raining a lot more now, not less. And globally, the rainfall is down. You have deluge in certain areas, but it's down. And the laws of physics say it can't be down unless there's something in this equation that shouldn't be there, and that's geoengineering. So the planet would immediately try to regain equilibrium, and there will be horrific weather, but it must be allowed to happen. It must be allowed to happen, or the planet won't make it much longer. How can you put chains and shackles around someone and throw them in the water and expect them to swim? It can't. How can the planet support life when it's in a straitjacket of climate engineering? It can't. It can't. So, no, the planet won't return to what we've known, but it could still support life. And that's what we have to look at. That's what we have to strive for. So.
We'll take maybe 2 more questions. Okay?
I know that the geoengineering is going all over the world, so I know that everyone is being affected. But we were talking politically about different...
If you can hold 1 second, anybody who leaves, if you guys take a tape with you, please. If you want a DVD, just grab one, okay? Sorry about that.
So you had mentioned earlier about different countries not complying. And so and then they got devastated either by a tornado or rain or whatever. So I would like to know if California has done something politically incorrect to receive such lack of rain and such disrespect.
Maybe. How about when, I'm just using this as an example, but everybody who wants to start the state of Jefferson, and I think it's commendable what you're doing, but what if this, let's just look at an example. What if you got that done, and I hope you do, and they cut your water off so you can't even survive? There's a lot of methods of control that are very indirect, and that's why weather modification has always been the weapon of choice. They can win a war and nobody even knows they fired a shot. Let's go back further. African countries, droughted out for decades, and you have U.S. boots on the ground in all of them. And we know meteorologically these programs were going on. It appears to be a direct cause and effect. We had record drought in Syria before that situation blew up. When a population becomes desperate, they're much more volatile, much easier to start chaos in a country. Iran, same thing. Doesn't matter what you think of Iran or their political views or religious views, doesn't matter. The point is, their meteorologists know this was happening. They've been on the floor of the UN. multiple times, the president, vice president saying our country's being droughted out by these weather modification programs from the NATO countries. And it's not just the NATO countries, Russia and China are at it too. They're absolutely at it. How many remember the Olympics? China said, don't worry, it won't rain. Anybody remember that? They were very overt about that. So you have record drought in all these countries before these invasions happen, before the chaos ensues. And quite simply, the degree to which this is happening, we can't know exactly in a defined sense who's doing what to who, because once you start affecting the whole system, the whole thing starts to spin out of control. It's like weather whack-a-mole, a tug-of-war between competing nations, and it's the epitome of human insanity. Absolute epitome of human insanity, and it's absolutely positively going on. Russia has their own ionosphere heaters also. Now, Putin did, to his credit, in this case, ask the IPCC. Now, let's imagine the biggest scientific panel I mentioned several times, right? 2,000 of the world's top climatologists. And I hate to use the word scientists because of the way they behave. So you have this largest scientific panel, and they were going to completely omit the single biggest climate affecting factor of all in their last report, climate engineering. Total omission. Putin asked them to address this issue. And we think that perhaps Russia has had enough of these programs. They're trying to shine the light on them, we hope. Right at that point when Putin did that, I had communication from an international TV show host, Abby Martin, RTTV, Russia Today. I had communication with her that was very receptive to the data I'm putting out at that same time. We don't have any direct avenue to put this data out, but it appears that there's a chance that at least Russia might be having severe second thoughts about these programs. We hope that's the case. But at this point right now, the whole system is being torn apart. Our life support systems are being torn apart. And when you drive around Reading here, it feels like you're in hell. The sun is so intense that you can't hardly touch anything, and it's degrading materials, it's killing plants, trees, and it can't go on. Simply can't go on.
Yeah, I just have a very quick question. Why? If these, I mean, I've been concerned about this for a very long time, but why on earth would people try to do this messing around, killing off the whole planet, killing the trees, everything else? They're going to die too.
The answer is always the same. It's power and control. It always comes down to power and control. So we look at these programs in their inception in the late 40s on the larger scale. They were weather weapons. We had weather weaponry in Vietnam, well publicized, Project Popeye. Very successful in the sense the military looks at it. So it comes down to power and control, always. And you must also remember what I said earlier. Let's look at the mentality of the same mentality that has built enough nuclear weaponry to exterminate the world 12,000 times over, the same power structure that we have nuclear meltdown in Japan right now that may kill us all. It's that serious. And yet they're building more nuclear plants. So we're not dealing with sanity. Right now, while we should be focused on how to save our planet's life support system, what are we doing? Again, building more nuke plants, more aircraft carriers. I just heard there are 2,500 F-35s, I think, what they're building. It's like a $300 or $400 million fighter jet. We need 2,500 more of those while the planet's descending to a state that it won't support life. There's no sanity in this equation. So the bottom line is it comes down to power and control, and those at the top are not clinically sane. And I stress this, 4% of society is psychopathic. That's a statistical fact. That percentage always ends up in power, always. And what's the common thread? And I've read a lot about this as well. The common thread with various forms of psychosis, like psychopathic people, is a near total lack of comprehension as to the consequences of their actions, even to themselves. This is a medical fact. That's what we're up against. And while everybody's been entertained with football games, American Idol, and iPhones, these guys have been busy. And if we don't wake up, stand up, and speak out now, we're not going to have the chance. It's that serious. And they can keep our rain. I stress, as I showed those that latest NOAA forecast that said, don't count on any rain, California. They can shut our moisture off as long as they want. I guarantee it. I've said it for 10 years. We're here now. And they have that ability. This is a 2 + 2 = 4. It's not speculation. And if any meteorologist, if Kruger or anybody else cared to have a very civil, fact-for-fact debate on the air, I'm game anytime. I've been on the air with Greenpeace's top scientist, who, if anybody who listened to that program, I think it was quite clear, he didn't know a whole lot about what was going on in the skies, and I think anybody who listened would know at the same time that he had no basis in fact with his conclusions. I've debated other quote-unquote experts on the air, and those tapes are available on geoengineeringwatch.org. I would gladly, very peacefully, civilly debate Kruger or anybody else on this issue, but they won't. At least they haven't, but I'm ready. So if you hear from Mike Kruger or Channel 7 or the Record Searchlight that we're all a bunch of nuts because Kruger says so, that needs to change. We need to call them on that and say, if you're so sure about your data, step up to the plate. Step up to the plate.
All right, Dane, well, give this man a hand. Was that good or what?
Thank you. Thank you. I feel the same toward every one of you.